In your films, there's often a lone hero standing up to the powers that be. Alexis Tsipras, could he be your new hero?
Alexis Tsipras, serait-il votre nouveau héros?
Well, in any case, in politics, yes. For a movie, I don't know. We'll see later. But yes, I think he's a rather exceptional figure by Greek standards. I think he's a man who's emerged from the middle class, who's risen up very quickly. The Greeks trust him. He has this great trust behind him. You know, people have misunderstood him and what he thinks. I saw him before he was elected. He was in Paris. He asked to see me, and we spent an evening together.
So you know him well?
Well, no, you know, we spent an evening and then we talked on the phone 2 or 3 times, but I asked him a lot of questions and I was impressed by the quality of his answers, the range of his ideas.
But if, staying with this idea of a hero, if he is a hero, that could also be someone who puts their country in danger, who takes a lot of risks.
No, the country was already in poor condition, you know, in very bad shape. It still is, for that matter. But he made promises to get elected, and he's trying to keep his promises. But where it moved me deeply was when he arrived in Brussels, in this extraordinary place, as we all saw on TV, with all these extraordinary people, luminaries of politics, economics, and he was suddenly there standing up to them, saying, "No, I want this." It made me think of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You remember the Frank Capra film? He's a young man from the country who arrives at the US Senate, and he resists. He resists in order to change things. It makes me think of that, as you're talking about films and heroes. So I think he's that kind of hero.
But then if he has these qualities that you're describing, he also has shortcomings. What are his shortcomings in your opinion?
I don't know. You'd have to know him well. I think that the shortcoming that all us Greeks have is to not be able to have a global overview of our problems. But I don't know him well enough to know his shortcomings. He must hide them well for all that.
When you say, for example, he doesn't see the big picture of the problems, so to speak, are you talking about Europe, the impact that he may have had on Europe?
Absolutely, but in my opinion the situation is very simple. He came to power with a very, very thin majority, very fragile, and promised things, as do all politicians in order to get elected. He was elected, and he did what all politicians do not do. He tried to keep his promises, and he insists to this day. And now he has come to a point where he cannot any longer. A week ago, 10 days ago, where he saw that he couldn't keep his promises. So what did he do? He called a referendum.
But the people didn't understand the question that was put to them. Is it democracy if we don't understand the question put in a referendum?
It depends on how the issue is explained to them, be that by the politicians or by the media. I explained the question to my grandson, Theo, who's 7 or 8, and he understood it right away. But I think it all got mixed, the politics and the figures. We've been hearing all these figures for a month on this business. It was scary, and in the end we didn't understand anything. I think it was badly explained to everyone.
We asked our online audience to send us questions for this interview. We received many questions, notably from Greece. And Stavros Rossos asks, and he mentions your last film, Le Capital, he asks if you see any links between Tsipras and the characters in his film. And I'd like to remind our viewers that it's a film about the megalomania of banks and high finance.
No, I don't see any relationship. I personally think that bankers and finance have led the world, Greece and the rest of the world, to where we are today. This kind of super capitalism where people no longer count, where there's more and more poor and more rich.
Well, that's the point. At the end of your film, the protagonist says, "I'm the new Robin Hood and I take from the poor and I give to the rich." Couldn't that be a metaphor for Greece and its creditors?
No, yes, well, in a way. But we have to see how this situation has come to Greece. Who is responsible for this? It's a huge problem. In any case, Tsipras has nothing to do, in my opinion, with the bankers of my film. That's for sure.
And Greece, to continue the metaphor, Greece was also seduced by money. It's also Greece's fault that it's in this situation. And we have the impression often that it's everybody's fault, but Greece's.
C'est toujours la faute aux autres.
Bien sûr, c'est de la faute
Of course it's the fault of Greece, the fault of politicians first of all, Greeks who have let their country fall into a rut, and then the ordinary Greeks too, who didn't pay attention to what was happening. But banks were telling them, you want to take a holiday? Well, here's the money. The people took the money without a second thought. And you want to buy a car? Well, come on, here's the money. And then at some point it happened to such an extent that they couldn't repay. And this responsibility is doubled, even tripled, I would say, for Europe, because Europe also has its responsibility. They saw very well that this debt was going up and up and up, and they did nothing to stop it. France, Holland, and especially Germany sold many products in Greece. They even sold submarines, and on credit.
Ils ont vendu même des sous-marins, très chers, et à crédit.
But how was Greece able to join the Eurozone? Weren't you surprised? Did you say to yourself, Greece isn't ready?
Oui, et j'aurais souhaité même que.
Yes, I would have preferred if they'd said we were going to wait 2 or 3 years before joining the euro to modernize the country and to get a functioning administration. I've always said Greece is a nation, but there's no state.
La Grèce est une nation, mais il n'y a pas d'État.
Vous avez la double perspective, France, française.
You have two perspectives, French and Greek. Taking your French perspective, can't you understand the Eurozone members who say, why not cut loose the weak link of Europe? They've had 5 years to put their house in order.
5 ans pour mettre leur maison en ordre.
Je les comprends.
I understand them on the one hand and don't understand them on the other, because this debt, if they cut us loose, what will happen? The Greeks will create another currency, the drachma or whatever, and it will be devalued immediately. I don't know by how much, 50 or 30%. The debt will rise automatically and it will be even harder to pay. This debt, they'll never pay it. So the best thing is to stay in Europe so they can pay the debt in part or entirely.
But what would the social consequences for Greece be if it left the euro?
Socialement, tragique.
Tragic. They'll turn towards countries like Russia, which is keen to have an outlet to the Mediterranean, and China, which wants to have a gateway to Europe.
Alexis Tsipras is also playing games because on the one hand he accuses Europe of blackmail, but at the same time he's kind of blackmailing Europe, strengthening his diplomatic ties with Russia.
Avec la Russie.
Yes, but there are several reasons for this, in my opinion. First, Greece sells a lot to Russia, but that's all stopped now because of Europe's relations with Russia. But also, like a good politician, he's pulled out another card to say, I have other options. It's the political game. It seems normal.
We received this question from Konstantinos Christofis, because I know Greece is close to your heart, and he asks, what comes to your mind when you hear the word Hellas, Greece?
Hélas means, well, it gives rise to great emotion, especially when it's in a situation as serious as it is. When it's okay, I don't care so much. I don't even think about it. And every time, for example, when the colonel seized power, I was so furious that I made the film Z. That's what I did, Z. Today, I don't have the inspiration. I don't have the story to make a movie. So I come to you to speak about Greece, to say that Tsipras is not what you think.
But the situation in Greece is now getting worse, and it seems it's going to get worse before it gets better. 60% of young people are unemployed. There's talk of a lost generation. But how many lost generations do you think we'll have?
There is unemployment, but there are also those who are leaving, and that's another loss for Greece, because it's not sure they'll come back. But that's what Tsipras is trying to fix, and that's been caused by politicians left and right, who led Greece for tens and tens of years. It's because of them that Greece has arrived in this situation.
You've been to Greece recently. How are the Greek people? What's your take on the sentiment there?
It's scary. People have no hope. Their mood is permanently black. They'll tell you all the problems they have because they all have problems, except of course those who have wealth. But I haven't met many of those. I met mostly those on the other side, and it's true that they want change, and their only hope is Europe.
But if they want change, they also need to take responsibility, and it's often said that the only market that operates in Greece at the moment is the black market. Is there a sense of responsibility?
I think that they are ready to change, provided that politicians give them direction, and that they are also honest.
et qu'il soit aussi honnête.
Well, exactly. Alexis Tsipras hasn't implemented reforms against clientelism and hasn't really encouraged a meritocracy.
You know, he's been there for 5 months. For me to make a film, it takes 2 years. To change a country in 5 months, with all the problems he has, with the Europeans, with debt, etc. I know that many reforms have begun to be studied and ultimately implemented. I do not know them all, but I've heard of a few. But it's true that it takes time to change a country that's slipped into the situation in which it has been for years and years, because the people no longer believe in these politicians.
But do they all believe in Tsipras? Because when we're talking about the referendum, 60% were in favour, but 40% were against.
But 60% is huge, because he was elected with 36%. Then you see the bounce he's had in a few months. So people do believe in him.
We're talking about the country's ills, and we've received this question from Barbara Simons-Schuwager, who asks, are there more corrupt politicians in Greece than in other countries? And if that's the case, why?
Because of the parties, an awful kind of clientelism took hold. We don't vote anymore for a government that will make laws, that will steer the party. We vote for our own interests. What is our MP going to do for us? It's the worst thing. And what do MPs do? They try to satisfy the electorate. This is the worst kind of democracy. It's another kind of dictatorship. And that's what has to change.
Alexis Tsipras has said, and I quote, "Nobody has the right to divide Europe, but don't you think it's a rather tragic irony that if anybody's dividing Europe, it's him?"
You believe Europe's united? It's divided completely. It's every man for himself. Look at the English, the Dutch. Everyone is pulling in different directions. It's scary what's going on in Europe. Europe was not built on a political foundation. It started with Jacques Delors, and then after him, Barroso, etc. They abandoned it.
But wouldn't you say that Tsipras has divided Europe with his words? He's brought Greece towards the euro exit.
No, it's the Europeans who brought him to the door.
It was both sides.
If Europe was divided by Tsipras in just 5 months, it couldn't have been very united.
So who would be the allies of Greece in Europe?
France.
You really think that France is an ally?
To a large extent. The Prime Minister, the President, and I heard other politicians yesterday who spoke in a very positive way about Greece. But countries have interests. They don't have friends. They don't have allies. You know, they have interests. So everyone looks after their own interests.
Exactly. So do you think that President François Hollande would choose Athens over Berlin?
No, it won't come down to choosing. I think he'll try to find a solution between the two. You know, in the negotiations, if we want to do it right, there can't be a winner. There has to be a compromise on both sides. Both have to give up something to have good negotiations. Otherwise, it's the strongest kind of dictatorship. It's true that Merkel has all the power right now in Europe, and that means Europe is not united, since there's one great power.
I mentioned the allies of Tsipras, and he really does have some unlikely allies. I'm thinking of Marine Le Pen, the French National Front leader. It seems Tsipras, perhaps unwittingly, has played into the hands of the Eurosceptics.
No, he hasn't played into their hands. He has, above all, played in the interests of the Greeks. So if some, like Madame Le Pen or Monsieur Mélenchon and others, choose to attach themselves to him to use his arguments for their own purposes, it's not his fault.
The former finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, has become almost an icon. He's a political superstar. He's even been described as the George Clooney of government.
Which isn't really a very flattering parallel politically, because Clooney is an actor, a political figure, a man of finance. All that's just made up by the media.
What do you think of him then? Should he have been sacrificed? Did he have to go?
No, he certainly had to go because his image among Europeans was not good. I don't know whether that was justified or not. From some things that I've seen in his blog, which I read from time to time, his bad image is not justified, but that's another matter. To continue with negotiations, Tsipras did well to let him go.
Et lorsque nous regardons ce qui se
When we
passe en
look at
Grèce,
what's happening in Greece, as I said at the beginning, it's like a film. We received this question from Malcolm Davey, who asks, does political cinema still exist?
Parce qu'on le vit.
All cinema is political. It was a French philosopher who said that, and he was right. All films are political, or there's politics in all films. We can analyse them politically. Why? Because it addresses thousands, millions of people, and that's what makes it political.
Alors, je vous demande
Let me
d'imaginer
ask you to imagine Alexis Tsipras, Varoufakis, Angela Merkel, Mario Draghi, the head of the European Central Bank, as characters in one of your films. What roles would you give them?
The role they have in politics. That's it. That would surely make a film, perhaps with a comic aspect.
And what would that comic aspect be?
Well, to be serious and to be light as well, as you've said before, to make people laugh, because they've done all these ridiculous things, the politicians.
And what can make us laugh in what's happening now?
I'd have to write it all down. Sometimes their behaviour, their lies, their contradictions. They say one thing one day, and then the next it's different.
Your last film was in 2012. Are you inspired by the situation we're living through today? Do you think about making another film about our lives now?
No, I am thinking of another kind of film. I am working on other themes. For the current European situation, it would take Charlie Chaplin to make a film about that.
Finally, your films are about reality, social problems, abuse of power. What's your view of society and its excesses?
Society has a new religion, and that's money. We only think of ourselves and how to get more and more. We think of others less and less. And, as I said before, we're in a society where there are more and more rich and more poor. Can we accept that that continues? I think we cannot. We absolutely cannot.
Costa-Gavras, merci beaucoup d'être avec nous.
Merci à vous, m'avoir reçu.